It's my privilege to introduce our speaker, Lois Stickell, who's the author of the newest history of the church, 200 Years in the Heart of Charlotte, A History of First Presbyterian Church, which will be published this fall. Lois spent 2 years researching this book, and at times it must have seemed like 200 years to her. She was a true bloodhound, getting into dusty stacks, deciphering illegible print, and tracking down family members. We are the lucky recipients of her diligence. She found so much information it could not all be included, so today we will hear some stories that did not make the final cut. Lois is a native of Indiana and a graduate of Indiana University. She spent several years working as an engineering geologist for the Army Corps of Engineers in Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas. She returned to college for her master's degree in library science and was a college librarian at Winthrop and the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. She has published journal articles in library and history publications, as well as co-authoring a book about a slave insurrection in Charleston, South Carolina. She and her husband purchased their house in the Elizabeth neighborhood the month that Hurricane Hugo hit. They continue to live there with their 2 sons and cats. Thank you for joining us, Lois.
Thank you, Linda. Do you hear me? Okay, I think I'm supposed to launch my slide now. Okay, I'm very glad to be with you to share PW's birthday celebration and to talk to you about several women of note of First Presbyterian Church. And Linda's right, I have just finished 2 years of research and of writing. And in the process, I came across many interesting women. I've narrowed it down to 3 tonight, and it really was a hard choice. But these women, all 3 made significant contributions in Charlotte and in North Carolina. I'm going to start with Annie Alexander. You probably have heard of her already. The other 2 women were a surprise to me, but all 3 of them really had a big impact, and I want to share that with you tonight. We'll start with Annie Alexander. She was born in 1864. She was born in a rural part of Mecklenburg County near Cornelius, and she attended medical school, the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. And this was really rare at the time. There were only 2 medical schools in the entire country, and she attended one of them with the encouragement of her father. She returned to Charlotte in 1887 and set up a practice. She was 23 years old at the time, but she'd already taught anatomy and she'd already performed surgeries. So as young as she was, she had experience. She was the first woman in North Carolina to practice medicine, and she was one of the first in the entire South to practice. So she was definitely a trailblazer. Annie Abbott was born in 1859, and she was born in Ohio. She attended Wellesley College, and she had some interesting hobbies. She liked to read Greek and Latin and German and French, and she liked to solve calculus problems. So she was clearly a brilliant woman. She moved to Charlotte in 1897 with her husband. F.C. Abbott was a major real estate developer. He developed the Wilmore neighborhood and what is today parts of Elizabeth. It was called Piedmont Park at the time. The stretch of Central Avenue from 7th Street heading out of town for maybe half a mile. He developed that area, and if you drive through there today, you can still see a couple of the old Victorian houses that were part of that development. The final woman, Julia Alexander, was the youngest, and she was born in 1876. She was the daughter of a United States congressman. And in her mid-30s, she did something that was really revolutionary. She went to law school. She came back to Charlotte in 1914. She was 38 years old, and she set up a law practice. She was the first woman in Charlotte to practice law, and she was only the third woman in all of North Carolina who was even licensed to practice. And all three of these women were steeped in Presbyterianism. Dr. Annie Alexander and Julia Alexander's families had been members at Hopewell Presbyterian for generations, back to the 1700s. The two women were actually second cousins. And Annie Abbott's father was a Presbyterian minister. Let's talk about Dr. Annie Alexander's work and its significance. Here she is in her horse and buggy. She made house calls in a horse and buggy, later in a Model T Ford. She limited her practice to women and children. And in the process, she really saw how poor living conditions and disease were causing the deaths of a lot of young mothers and their children. And because of that, she became an advocate for better city sanitation and just all around better nutrition. And here she is, her very first year in Charlotte. I don't know if you can see my cursor, and she's already giving a talk about food, its preparation, and its relation to health. So she was trying to educate women about nutrition from the very beginning. She was a calm, quiet woman. And there she goes in her horse and buggy. Each of these women had high social status. They were all three frequently mentioned in the society pages of the newspaper. They entertained often, and they belonged to many clubs and organizations, including the Country Club, Colonial Dames, the Daughters of the American Revolution, and two of them, the United Daughters of the Confederacy. And they often used their place in society to help causes that they believed in, for instance, raising money for the Florence Crittenden home. And the picture that we're looking at is Dr. Annie Alexander in Colonial Dames costume for a Colonial Dames tea. But she also gave a tea to raise money for the Florence Crittenden home right around the turn of the century, the previous century. They were really struggling to come up with enough money to even build the Florence Crittenden home. And she gave a tea for her wealthy, influential friends, and they got enough money to really put them over the top, so they were able to build the home. And this is the Florence Crittenden home. It was located at 9th and McDowell Street. The Episcopal school is there today. It was a home for unwed mothers, and Dr. Annie Alexander provided services for the young women who were pregnant. Women of First Presbyterian Church also helped. They furnished rooms and they furnished supplies for the home. And I mention that because we're talking about three specific women here today, but they had a lot of help and support within the church always, the entire time. And we'll see that a little bit more later on too. Annie Abbott's work, she started the Charlotte Women's Club. And when you hear Women's Club, you might think bridge and tea. And they actually did do that. They brought in someone to teach them how to play contract bridge. So they had fun, but their real purpose, they started the Parent Teacher Association. They were a civic organization. They also started the city's first kindergartens. They brought in public health nurses. And I want to read you a quote from the Charlotte Observer about public health nurses to sort of give you an idea of what they were in that day and time. And the newspaper said, quote, "By public health nurse, we mean visiting nurse, tuberculosis nurse, prenatal nurse, child welfare nurse, school nurse, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera," end quote. So these nurses filled a vital need in Charlotte, and Dr. Annie Alexander had been instrumental in helping make them possible. The club also paid part of their salaries. The Women's Club also created the League of Women Voters and a domestic relations court. The picture that we're looking at is the Charlotte Women's Club on Moorhead Street. It was built in 1924 and it's still there. It's right across from Covenant Presbyterian. And Linda's nodding her head like, yes, I know. The jewel in the crown of the Women's Club was the YWCA. And it was started in 1902. The Charlotte chapter was organized in 1902. And Annie Abbott was very instrumental in making that happen. And it was organized to provide a safe, affordable place to live. And that was particularly for young women who were leaving the farms and coming to live in Charlotte. They were going to work in the textile mills. They didn't know anyone here. They didn't have much money, and they needed somewhere that they were protected. The club also provided recreational programs and education, initially in a building that only housed 11 women. Dr. Alexander was the manager and attending physician, so if the girls had health problems, she was there to help. She and Julia Alexander, and of course Annie Abbott, were all active in a campaign to raise $60,000 to build this building that would house a lot more young women. It housed 54 young women to give them affordable housing. And I think I should just say that Dr. Alexander, Julia Alexander, and Abby Abbott did not need affordable housing. They did this out of empathy for the less fortunate. They just felt compelled to take action. Let me restart that. The YWCA created several outreach programs, which was really further expanding the Charlotte Women's Club's missions. And one of their outreach programs was childcare, the first childcare program in the city, and it was at a textile mill, the Highland Park Mill, so that those textile workers had a safe place for their children to go. They also had libraries in some of the factories, and their most enduring work, I think, is Traveler's Aid. They had a white employee staff a desk at the railroad station, and she was there all day and part of the night. And what we're looking at here on the left is the Southern Railway Station. It was at the 500 block of West Trade Street. So it was just 3 blocks west of the church. Obviously a beautiful old building. And the Y employee was there to provide travelers a glass of water, point them to the cafes or hotels. But her real purpose was to help stranded travelers, and that was especially vulnerable girls and women who might end up in Charlotte with no money, and there was a possibility they could be victimized, what today we would call human trafficking. And so the Y was there to help make sure that did not happen. This is another picture of that building. It was truly magnificent. In addition to their civic work, all 3 of the women were involved church members. And in 1914, when the Women's Auxiliary was formed at First Presbyterian, the women chose Annie Abbott as the first president. Church historian Madeline Orr, who would have known Annie Abbott very well, said, "It was felt that Mrs. Abbott was the very best person to get things going smoothly. She was charismatic, she was a gifted organizer, and clearly a born leader. She'd already proven that with the Women's Club and the YWCA. And she took some of those skills to the fight for women's right to vote." All 3 of the women we're talking about today were active in the suffrage movement. You can see Julia Alexander here was elected permanent chair. Here's Annie Alexander over here. I'm sorry, Dr. Alexander, introducing a national speaker. And over here is Mrs. F.C. Abbott, or Annie Abbott, working on a legislative committee. So they were all 3 working for the right of women to vote. As an aside, In 1918, Julia Alexander, who was an attorney, was the first woman to argue a case before the North Carolina Supreme Court. But even while she was arguing that case, she could not vote. So no woman could vote until the 19th Amendment was passed, ratified in August 18, 1920. But once they could vote, Julia Alexander ran for mayor. And these are her mayoral, her candidacy headquarters on the 100 block of South Tryon Street. She lost. So that didn't slow her down. In 1924, only 4 years after she got the right to vote, she ran for the state legislature. And she did not do this alone. She had support of her friends. This is her announcement in the newspaper of her candidacy. And down at the bottom is an advisory list of all women who were on her advisory committee. And Dr. Annie Alexander was one of those women supporting her. There's also a Mrs. E.M. Cole, and some of you might know her as Patty Cole. So there was support from within and outside of the church. And she won this time. Let's back up. She was one of 3 candidates elected out of 50 who ran, and she was elected to the North Carolina House of Representatives. She became the second woman to serve in the North Carolina House of Representatives. When she ran for re-election, she lost, but that's okay because she paved the way for really all of the others who came after her in politics. She was a very colorful, opinionated woman, and she liked to be out front. This is her in 1916 with the President of the United States. That's him in the middle in the tall hat. And I'm pretty sure this is her right here in the big black hat. She was the mistress of ceremonies when President Wilson came to visit. She played the part of the spirit of Queen Charlotte in a pageant related to the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence. She just liked to be out there, but she also took that confidence into her law practice, and she was the first woman to argue a case in Superior Court, to argue before a jury, and she won. I'm sorry, let's put that picture there earlier so you could see how fabulous she looked as Queen Charlotte. So you have a doctor, a lawyer, and an activist, and they did not all have the same interests. Dr. Annie Alexander cared about health conditions in the city, and particularly about the need for better sanitation and nutrition to prevent the outbreaks of diseases that they saw a lot of, like typhoid fever and smallpox, and nutritional deficits like pellagra. Julia Alexander cared about politics and history and about animal welfare. She lobbied to have drinking troughs put in town for horses so that when farmers came to town, their horses could get water, and she was successful. Annie Abbott cared about protecting vulnerable women and children, and they all 3 cared about the success of each other. And you can see that the Women's Club passed a resolution of endorsement to continue medical inspections in schools. They were in danger of being discontinued. And it was an initiative that Dr. Alexander had started. So they were always there to help the others in what was of interest to that other person. They were good women, but they had their faults, and they were definitely of their time and place. Dr. Annie Alexander supported eugenics. Julia Alexander supported legislation to ban the teaching of evolution. She did that when she was serving in the North Carolina House of Representatives. And Annie Abbott said, quote, "The primary business of a woman is still the homemaker," end quote. So although they were forward-looking in a lot of things, they also had their limitations and didn't necessarily see things the way we see them today. In 1929, Dr. Alexander died. She had been a physician in Charlotte for 42 years. And in fact, until 4 years before she died, she was the only female physician in Charlotte. She had been a pioneer in public health before it really even had a name. She wrote many research papers and presented them all over the state. She was a charter member and the president for a while of the Mecklenburg County Medical Society, served on the boards of many charities, including the Florence Crittenden Home, and she taught Sunday school at First Presbyterian. Oops, let's go back. She never married, although she did adopt a son who was believed to have been born at the Florence Crittenden home. 2 weeks after she died, the stock market crashed and the country went into the Great Depression. Many people lost their jobs and their life savings, including members of the Southern Manufacturers Club. And I'd ask for a show of hands who's ever heard of it, but I can't really see your hands, so let me tell you about it. This building was the Southern Manufacturers Club. It was where rich textile magnates met and made deals. It stood where the church parking lot is today, facing West Trade Street. And to the left was Mrs. Stonewall Jackson's house. And of course, to the right was the church. Most of the members lost their savings and went bankrupt. Annie Abbott and her husband also lost most of their fortune. Shortly after the Depression began, the federal government decided to tear down this building, the United States Mint. It had been built in 1845, and it was one of the oldest buildings in Charlotte. A lot of people fought to keep it from being torn down. The government wanted to expand this big red brick building, which was the post office. Julia Alexander is calling on her friends here to keep it from being razed. Here she is again. She's got more friends supporting her, including Mrs. F.C. Abbott or Annie Abbott. As I said, a lot of people in Charlotte tried to prevent this building from being demolished, and they lost, and it was demolished. They didn't give up the fight. They got together the money to buy what was essentially a pile of rubble and to reconstruct it in the Eastover neighborhood on Randolph Road. It was a 4-year battle that ended with the Mint being reconstructed on Randolph. It was also one of Annie Abbott's last battles. She died in 1935. She was 75 years old. And the very next year, the Mint Museum opened as North Carolina's first art museum. So Julia Alexander was the only one of the three still surviving. She continued to be active in civic and social organizations, including trying to keep Settlers Cemetery from being turned into a public park. This is a picture of Settlers Cemetery that was in a book that she wrote. She also was a voice at the city council meetings well into her 70s, showing up to voice her opinion on many subjects. She died when she was 81 years old in 1957. The legacy she left was she was Charlotte's first female attorney. She also served as vice president of the North Carolina Bar Association. She helped save the Mint and transform it into a museum. Another of her legacies was that she had served as the first president of the Humane Association, and she prosecuted a number of cruelty to animal charges. She was also a religious leader. She had started the beginners and the primary department at First Presbyterian and sang in the choir for many years. And of course, she was a politician who was only the second woman to serve in the North Carolina legislature. She never married, although she had several nieces and nephews, including Mary Brevard Alexander Howell, or some might remember her as Bard. Dr. Alexander's legacy was in the thousands of female physicians in North Carolina today, including Annie Abbott's great-granddaughter. Dr. Alexander has been honored with a historical marker where her office and home once stood. It's on North Tryon, where the Behringer Hotel is today. And there is a statue planned for her on Little Sugar Creek Greenway. Annie Abbott's legacy endures in the Charlotte Women's Club, which is the oldest civic organization in Charlotte, and it remains dedicated to community improvement. Her legacy endures in free kindergartens, in Travelers Aid, which is now Community Link, and probably most importantly in the YWCA. This is a rendering of 104 affordable housing units that the Y is getting ready to break ground on Park Road. And it's a continuation of the legacy that Annie Abbott started in 1902 when she helped create affordable housing for young women coming to work in the factories. And finally, her legacy endures. Her legacy to the church lives on in PW, which thrives 107 years after she served as its first president. Thank you for letting me come into your homes and talk to you about these remarkable women.